Welcome to today's show. I'm your host, Reed Stone. Alongside me is my co-host, Bob Foley, and our guest today is Susan Williams. Susan is the founder of Booming Encore, a digital media hub dedicated to providing information and inspiration to help people create and live their best later life. Susan is also the co-author of the book, Retirement, Heaven or Hell, Which Will You Choose? And a contributor to the book, Longevity Lifestyle by Design. Susan frequently writes and publicly speaks about the opportunities and challenges related to aging, retirement, and longevity. Susan, thanks for joining Bob and I today. We're excited to talk to you both about Booming Encore, your website that recently, I believe, celebrated 10 years of being a website. That's amazing. And then also to talk to you about your 60 Before 60 project. So,
well, thank you so much for having me. I'm delighted to be here.
Yeah. So let's start with your website. You just celebrated 10 years, is that right?
Absolutely. I can't believe it. Time certainly does fly.
I had no idea that Booming Encore had been around that long. When I got into the retirement coaching space, I came upon Booming Encore. It's always been one of my go-to sites. It's always been a site when I have people ask me, where should I go for more information to learn about planning for life and retirement? I always tell them Booming Encore, it's at the top of the list. It's such a great site. When you started Booming Encore 10 years ago, how did you, because that was really before there was much conversation about planning for what retirement looks like. The boomers were kind of just starting to enter retirement. So how did you get started on Booming Encore?
Yeah, it's definitely not what I was expected to do. That's for sure, Reed. 10 years ago, I had just left the corporate world. So I'd spent 28 years in the corporate world in a number of different senior leader and executive positions. And my primary background was strategic planning, organizational development, business transformation, and operational management. And so when I decided to leave the corporate world, I thought, geez, you know what I really need to do? I need to help small businesses. I need to help them take some of the concepts to help them grow, because so many small businesses were going under, and often it was related to their growth strategy, which often was, I'm an entrepreneur who can do everything, and then unfortunately finding out they can't, and they didn't necessarily have the tools to be able to actually, grow their business. So that's what I started out with, was that thought process. But as I started talking to small businesses and medium-sized businesses at that time, I got, remember 10 years ago, social media was just starting to take hold. And so all they wanted to talk to me about was social media. What about my social media? And I'd say, well, what about your business strategy? What about my social media? And so it seemed to be a common thread. And at the time, I myself had like zero knowledge of social media. I don't even think I had a Facebook account. And so I thought, okay, if they want to know more about social media, I better serve my clients. So I better learn about it. And so being a bit of an experiential learner, I thought the best way to learn for me was to learn through doing. So then it was the thought process about, well, what do I want to actually, talk about or be engaged in? And at the time I was going through my own sort of personal career transformation, in that I was not exactly sure what I wanted to do. I knew I had probably, I knew it for a fact I didn't want to retire, and I knew I had about 30 years to fill, and I was struggling. I was like, what am I supposed to be doing with these next years that are coming up? How am I going to, figure this out? And I went out looking for resources, and I came up and with absolutely nothing. So going back to your point, there really was not much out there. There were a couple bloggers, maybe one or two websites, but nothing that what I would call credible or reputable resources. And so that's when the light bulb kind of went off. It's like, okay, if I can't find it, I'll create it. And so I started up a very rudimentary website. I opened up all these social media channels. And probably for about the first 5 years, I did it under a cloak. I almost call it like I was having like a professional affair. I would do my consulting during the day, and then I'd sneak off at night and, do my research and my writing. And I didn't let anybody know. I was like, I was under this veil of silence, except for my family and maybe a few close friends, because I don't know, you guys are probably in the similar category. But when we were coming through our careers, there was this thing called moonlighting. Do you guys remember that?
Oh, yeah.
And it was really kind of looked down upon. Like, you had your career, and then if you were moonlighting, you kind of had to do it on the sly, because your employer only wanted you to do, their job. You dedicate yourself and you're loyal to that career path. And then if you did something on the side, it was almost like you were cheating. And so that was my mentality until I went to this conference, and this young woman opened up my eyes, and she was talking to me about like the millennial generation and all their slash careers. Have you guys heard of the term slash career?
Mm-mm.
Yeah. Okay. I hadn't at the time. And so just for the audience's purpose, it was like they were business analyst slash barista, or,
Oh,
I'm whatever their career was slash dog walker. They all had additional jobs on the side in order to, make sure that they could stay financially stable, or have also share their interests. And I was also discovering a lot of employers were actually kind of interested in that because it showed a different dimension to people besides just the one that they were presenting to their employer. It was nice to see that they had outside interests as well. So that happened about 5 years ago. So with that in mind, I decided to heck with it. Okay, I'm going to announce to the world that I'm consulting slash Booming Encore's founder. And so I changed my LinkedIn profile, updated it, pushed it out the door, and you know what happened next? Guess nothing. And I think the point what I really learned out of that is sometimes we can give a lot of value to what other people have thought are thinking about us, when in actual fact they're not thinking about us at all. And so it was somewhat of a freeing event. As soon as I did that, at that point, it was like, you know what, I'm out. I'm now doing this. And over the last 5 years, I've moved more into Booming Encore and spending the majority of my time now actually, researching, writing, and working with my contributors and all of the activities now associated with it. So that's sort of my background in a 2-minute capsule.
So do you consider this your purpose now?
Absolutely, absolutely. The most enjoyment I get out of this is finding something that I find absolutely interesting and have, especially around, aging, retirement, and longevity, and being able to share that with others. It's almost like I feel like I'm giving back something to others around how they can, live their best later life. So when I find something or some new research, I feel like I'm almost a bit of a conduit between the research and then the practical application of it. And that's really what we try to focus on. Is there's a lot of information out of there, but how do we actually distill it to help people, consume it, understand it, and ideally live it?
Right. So when you started Booming Encore, and after about a couple of months, nothing happened, what motivated you to keep going?
I don't know. I mean, it's a great question, Bob. Quite honestly, some days I would wake up and go, why am I bothering? Because I mean, in those early days, I felt like I was just, shooting, out in the wind. And was there anybody out there? Some days I just want to say, anybody? It was a very slow process. And I nicknamed it my kitchen sink strategy because it was almost like a drip a day, into your sink. But eventually, over time, it builds. And that's the beauty of, I think, what we have now is that all of our audience and the people that follow us, they were all gained organically. So I never actually paid for any advertising. So people actually joined us because they were truly interested in what we were trying to do. And that's why I think we've got like such a loyal following at this point.
Absolutely.
I think that's really the importance of your site and other similar sites, Susan, is I think people want to read stories that they can relate to, that they can read the story and say, yes, that's something I've gone through, that's something I feel. And so that's why I think sites like yours are so important for people. They have to, I think, see that other people are going through these same things, and by reading these stories, it gives them ideas on maybe what comes next for them in retirement. So that's what I really enjoy about your site. And there's a variety of topics too.
Yeah,
So,
we
so
try and cover so many different aspects of it. Everything from health to encore careers to aging in place to, we dabble a little bit in travel. We also try and tackle some of the tougher conversations, such as ageism, or, how do you actually cope with the aspects of getting older and changing your own attitude and perspective around it. So I mean, we really try to offer a wide variety of topics, and I'm really blessed because I've got some amazing contributors that actually, contribute to the site and share their knowledge and experience with us too.
So do I know quite a bit of the writing and for the site. So how do you come up with topics, and how have some of those topics maybe evolved over the years?
Yeah, when I first started writing, it was just more of I would like to say more of a generalist kind of approach. But now the writing that I typically do is probably more from an editorial slash commentary perspective. And that's sort of where I'll find something and say, you know what, I think there's not something so great about this. So for instance, a recent article I wrote was around how images are not necessarily being portrayed well of an older population, and specifically in social media, and especially for older women. So for instance, an example of this is I was very concerned when my daughter, went online and social media and the influence that images can have on her self-esteem and self-worth, and had a lot of conversations around that. I'm now starting to worry and be a little bit concerned for older women, because I'm seeing a similar kind of trend happening there related to some of the images that are being portrayed on what, aging is supposed to be for an older woman. And I think we all need to figure out and be comfortable and with our own selves and our own view of aging, rather than necessarily accepting what's being pushed on us. So it's those type of topics that, I'll address, or anything related to aging, or how some of the technology that's being introduced and the slippery slope that we may be, looking at in the future if we're not careful, as we start bringing in some of these caregiving tools and systems, we need to make sure that we're not replacing, the personal touch and the humanity that we need to, ensure that we retain as we bring in these. So how are we going to make sure and govern, how this is all being used? So those are more the topics that I'm personally in, and then along with the research, as I mentioned before, seeing what's new in the research and then trying to distill it down into, some actionable items. So one of my I guess my more popular post was like 22 ways to positively age. And I sort of kind of distilled down a lot of the research into 22 items that people can actually do today. So it's not something you have to plan. I mean, it's just like, go get your teeth checked, or your vision, your hearing, make sure you laugh a lot. These are just things that we can do today to help us, age well and age, in hopefully a happy and productive way.
As you've been writing over the years, Susan, and I'm guessing readers respond to what you've written a lot of times, are there certain topics that you see that people are finding there's more interest in those topics?
Health is obviously the number one priority for a lot of people, and rightly so. I mean, I always say we don't age overnight; we age over years. So the sad part is sometimes people are waking up to that fact, quite later in life, saying, "Oh, my health isn't going to be here forever," because something actually happens. Versus, we should probably have started in our 30s. But that said,
Yeah.
any time to start is the best time to start. So we try to, share and especially through our social media channels, as much as we're sharing our content, we also go to those credible sites and share their content as well. So we're, hopefully sharing out the best content that we can find and distilling it, because there's a lot of information out there, and trying to help people, find the most accurate and I come back to that credible and reputable information that we're sharing. So, there's definitely health. I think the other thing that is finally emerging, and Reed, I know you're, and Bob, you're probably well into this as well, the whole sense of purpose and what an important role that actually plays. People really do need a reason to get out of bed in the morning. If you don't have a good reason to get up, like that whole idea of, well, what are you going to do for the day, if you have no sense of purpose or idea or of how you're going to, positively fill your day, it truly can affect your health. And so I think we're finally starting to see that shift and that recognition that this is important. So those days of, sitting in a rocking chair or traveling or playing golf all day, every day, I mean, it's nice to do for a short period of time, but at the same time, it loses its specialness if you're doing it all the time. So, you've got to balance it in an overall life view, and how this next stage of life is actually going to roll out for you. So which leads me to the third topic, which I think a lot of people are starting to really take a strong interest in, which is, part-time work or volunteering. How can I do some of these activities to help, make my day feel worthwhile, make me feel like I'm contributing, make me continue to stay socially engaged and active. And I think that kind of ties into actually the second and the first. I mean, having a reason to get up, gets you up and out and with people, and then the sense of purpose. So they're all kind of tied together when you actually start to take a look at a lot of these things.
So with all this writing you've done and all these people that have contacted you, can you share with us who some of the more memorable people, maybe even surprising people that try to connect with you through your writing?
I think I'm really fortunate that because I was sort of a pioneer in this space starting 10 years ago, there's a few of us that have actually stayed fairly well connected through the course of time. So for instance, one of the very first interviews that I actually did was with Melissa Davey, who actually was in the corporate world, and then she became a film director, and like totally out of her wheelhouse. But I thought that was an amazing way to actually demonstrate that you don't have to keep doing what you can stretch and try to do something different. This has always been something that she'd been interested in, but she actually went and did it, and actually became somebody who became created and produced and directed her own documentary. So I found that was, and we've stayed what I would call friends since then. John Tarnoff is I don't know if you're familiar with John, but he's very active in the career space. He was one of the first gentlemen I ever interviewed for one of our articles, and the first book I actually read in this space. So, it's this collection of people and interesting people as I've moved through this. So, Stephen Gallant is a professor of gerontology, and so he's an ongoing contributor to us, who always writes such thought-provoking articles on things that we really maybe have to rethink of how we think about aging, and specifically his area of expertise in aging in place. So it's a long list of people that over the course of 10 years I've been really fortunate to have acquired, and then and actually created relationships with. And of course there's Mike Drack. Mike and I have been partners in crime for the last 7 years. That's who I co-authored Retirement Heaven and Hell with, and contributed to Longevity and Lifestyle by Design. And then of course I would be amiss if I didn't say, Reed and I connected, Lori Brecker, Simon Chan, Scott Fulton. I mean, all of these people were also contributors, and we had the opportunity to kind of all work together, as that book was created and produced.
Susan, have you seen any changes in the way people kind of think about or perceive retirement back when you started, and what you're seeing now? Because I see a lot of change coming, at least in the way that people are viewing retirement. What have you noticed?
I think the first thing is, I mean, when I started out 10 years ago, if you Googled the word retirement, all you would ever get is the financial aspects of it. That was it. Stop. I mean, it was retirement planning, financials. That was the end of it. And that was part of, I think, the challenge. So I think over the time, we've actually seen that starting to shift. And I don't want to take away from the fact that financials are still an absolutely critical part. And it is quite concerning that a lot of people are very ill prepared for the financial aspects, and especially with the additional longevity that we've got, and the potentially 30, 40 years. I mean, so that whole concept of retirement, I think, is truly being questioned, and frankly should be. Because when it was first created, it was like, I think the lifespan was like 62, and that was the retirement age was 65, something along those lines, So, I mean, the intention wasn't to fund, a 30 or 40-year retirement with the social programs that we have in place. So we do need a fundamental review of what retirement actually is. And I actually see that kind of interesting with my own children. They're like, well, we're likely never going to retire. We're just going to probably take sabbaticals. So, I mean, the thought process around the whole life cycle itself, I think, is starting to shift. So that's one of the changes. But the other thing is, and I want to go back to the financial aspect, because I do not believe people are taking the time to actually really think about what they want to do in retirement in order to then have the financial means to do that. So, I mean, you guys have probably seen all the, articles, is $1 million enough? Or what's your magic number? Or, what the 4% rule. Rather than actually saying everybody is different and everybody's needs are different, you have to actually do that hard work to try and figure out what you want to do in retirement. And then what are the financial means that you need to have? And then is it going to be a traditional retirement, or do you plan on working part-time in retirement in order to supplement your cash flow? Or do you not plan on retiring at all? I mean, and these are some of the conversations, and especially, with your audience of financial planners, I do not necessarily believe that these conversations are happening very frequently, and probably should, because a one-size-fits-all retirement, I think, is completely now in the past, and everybody's interests and desires and needs are different. So you can't just take a vanilla approach to something that's much more complicated. We're all more complicated than that.
Yep, exactly. Bob, any thoughts on that?
Well, from the people that you've talked to, what advice can you give us in terms of what's the best way to approach it? I mean, this whole idea about finding your own purpose to then determine what your new identity is, all those things are very, very important. But it just seems like society has just totally ignored that, and you're cut adrift into the wilderness. Good luck, kid. It's like graduating from college or high school again, and you're on the path to somewhere, you're just not quite sure where.
Absolutely. And that's why, and thanks for the door opener there, Bob, because quite honestly, that's what Longevity Lifestyle by Design was meant to do. And so, Reed was a contributor to it. Mike Drack was the primary author. And the reason this book was written is because we saw that there was such a large gap. I mean, we talk about, everybody should have a purpose, or, you take a look at these things as you age or whatever, but there was no real, what I'd call, manual on how to actually do that. And so that's what this book is designed to do, is actually to take people, start from here, go through these different steps, and hopefully by the end, you'll have crystallized, more effectively what you can do, what you're planning on doing, the sort of the time frame, how are you going to schedule your life around it, how much money are you going to actually need to actually be able to do this. So it's a real process sort of driven book. We go very heavily into Ikigai, which I know you guys are probably quite familiar with, understanding what interests you, what you're good at, and the term what you can get paid for. I often say it can also be intrinsically paid for, such as volunteer work. It's not necessarily, money and passing hands. It's sort of what's going to make you feel good about what you're doing, and trying to find that sweet spot. And then with the book, we also have the worksheet that people can actually, work along as they go through the book. And Reed and Lori really did a good job on putting that together. So that's our attempt to provide this information. And because we felt that it was so critical, we're actually giving away the book by download for free. So we didn't want anybody not to have access to this information. I mean, of course, you can buy it through Amazon or whatever book outlet you want, but the book itself is downloadable in a PDF form along with a worksheet for free through our website, boomingencore.com. So that's how we're trying to kind of close some of those gaps and really help people. And the feedback I've gotten has been very, very positive on that. So people are actually using it, and it's truly making a difference in how they're actually approaching retirement. Unfortunately, a lot of people are kind of doing this after they retire, and we're really trying to promote, like, start thinking about it before you retire, because the average retiree sort of spends 2 years in this sort of abyss stage of trying to figure out what they want to do. And the one thing that, I don't know about you guys, but I'm realizing I'm getting closer to the end line than I am to the beginning. So I'm trying to speed things up to try and really take advantage of the time that I have left. And if we can help people avoid sort of that indecision and insecurity, and they actually go into their later years knowing it and having a clear vision of what they plan on doing, it can really make a big difference, we believe.
Yeah, the generational differences right now are kind of astounding. The millennials don't feel that there'll be anything left for them in retirement. Gen X feels that their employers should be the one giving them financial advice and also giving themselves either career or after career advice. And of course, the baby boomers, well, they can't party enough. It's spring break all the time. And we know that a number of our compadres go into that mindset, get into about 6 months of it, and then all of a sudden they sit down one day and say, is that all there is?
Yeah.
So that book that you guys have produced is absolutely stellar when it comes to thinking about all that stuff. But I guess the sad part of it is, though, that the majority of people ignore that. And why do you think it is? I talk to people. Sometimes it's fear, sometimes it's embarrassment. Sometimes people don't want to admit that they haven't prepared well for the second half of life because they really haven't given any thought to it. Because in their previous life, my hair's on fire. With this, that, and the other thing, and then finally they have time to focus on themselves, and it scares the heck out of them. What do you find?
I think it's a combination of a few things. One, I think from a societal perspective, I mean, we promoted retirement as this sort of finish line. Like, and everybody, you work, heads down, you're going to get to the finish line, and then you're going to go off, and it's going to be, the gates are going to open, and it's just going to be absolutely wonderful. And so when people cross that finish line, to actually then put their hand up and go, it's not quite the the heaven that you had ideally told me it was going to be. It's almost an embarrassment, because everybody's like, oh, you're retired, you're so lucky now, oh, I wish I was you. And then to actually say, it's not really that great, I'm not having a good time, is, it takes some courage to actually, even first of all and foremost, actually admit that. So I think society, we have not done a very good job of promoting retirement. I mean, beyond, like I said, all day of golf, or the gray locks flowing on the boat. I mean, or running up and down a beach. I mean, it's fine to do that for a holiday period, but you can't necessarily fill days of substance with that every day. It just loses that sort of the whole idea of being special. So I think there's that. Then there is the hard work. I mean, this is a thought process. Takes some time, and sometimes you can see things that you don't necessarily want to see. You may all of a sudden be filled with some regrets. I wish I had done this earlier, or I wish I spent more time with these people before, or so it can be quite an emotional exercise to go through when you're doing some of that deep thinking. And then thirdly, there's a whole behavioral change aspect of it. When you're used to having a reason to get up because you got to get to work for 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock, and you're there till 5. I mean, it becomes a routine. All of a sudden your routine is completely out of whack, and you're going, I don't know what I'm going to do today. I don't even know where to start. And then you start thinking, I really should do this, but then you turn on the TV, and you can stream you can binge watch like 15 episodes. And that's why I think we're seeing, and this drives me crazy, like the TV consumption of people over the age of 65 is some ungodly number, like 47 hours a week or something.
47 hours, correct.
Oh, well, there you go. Off the top of my head, it blows my mind. I just keep thinking, like, that talent that's just sitting on a couch. But again, it's a behavioral change. So, just like we all say, oh, I need to eat better, or I should do this. Changing a shoulda, woulda, coulda to I am, there is an effort required, and sometimes we make it way too easy to take door number one rather than push ourselves and get up and go and do those things that we say we really want to do. So I think those are just some of the elements. It's a complicated conversation, but those are sort of the three that I kind of see out there right now.
Right. Let's talk about the social side of life. All right. Let's talk about the side of life that unfortunately many people who are involved with others lose that person because they've been called home. All right. And then they find themselves single again, single after 40 years, 50 years, whatever. And they say to themselves, what am I supposed to do now?
Yeah.
The average age of widowhood here in the States, at least, is 59 years old.
I know.
There's a gigantic population out there of people who either feel as though that they want to connect. I mean, what's the best singles bars for plus 60 people? I mean, none of those things exist. Okay, but what's some of your insights about the social side of life at this age?
Well, there's a couple things I've found in my research, which I found was quite interesting. One is that for the people that are either divorced or widowed or whatever, the men are much more interested in getting remarried than the women.
Right.
Because women actually are older women are going, okay, so I've got my kids have left the house. The last thing I want to do is, potentially get back into another relationship, because women tend to be the ones that are in charge of the social calendar, the domestic responsibilities, and all of those things, which at least this generation right now are used to having women still doing that for them. So a lot of the older women right now today are like, been there, done that, don't want to go back, happy to date, but, please leave at the end of the night, sort of thing. I don't really feel like getting remarried. So there is a fairly large population of older women that are in that. Then there is the aspect of, I mean, I know a lot of people are trying the whole online dating thing, and we've all heard different stories and varying degrees of the success behind that. But I think really the best place to start, if you're really interested in meeting people, is finding something that you enjoy doing, and actually join a group that does that, because chances are you're going to find somebody else there who also enjoys what you do. So, whether it's curling or it's painting, or, go to an art class, or, go play pickleball. I mean, pickleball is a top, social sport right now and growth in North America. I mean, and the reason is because it's a very social sport. So I think people have to really, again, think about what they enjoy doing, and then find groups of people that are actually doing that. And chances are, I think we're sort of moving a little bit past the whole romanticized view of things and more into people that you want to spend time with, companions. And I think that's really, ways to fill up your life and fill up your relationship pool, is with people that, you enjoy spending time with, doing things that you enjoy. I mean, it's quite a simple equation, but again, it causes you to have to get up and go out and actually, meet people. And there is that, if you've never had to do that before, that could be a very challenging experience.
How about the legacy issues, and like what you want to leave behind? The whole idea about planning for that the ultimate. What's some of your advice on that?
Well, I think first and foremost is people should probably think about it. Beyond, again, we get back to the financial will aspect of things. And even then, people are not doing a very good job of that. So the estate planning aspect is I can't remember the numbers off the top of my head, but it's not that strong, and it should be. So first and foremost, take care of that, because the last thing you want to do is leave your loved ones with a whole dilemma of, what are we going to do with all your stuff, or how is this all going to be divided, or heaven forbid they all fight over it. So,
Right.
one, cross that off the list. And then two, think about, how do you want to be remembered? I mean, I think in some ways we all have some sort of innate desire for us to be remembered in some way. So whether it's just through the relationships you held, or how you made people feel, to actually tangible assets, like you want to share your life story, or memories and pictures, things, or volunteer, or whatever way you would really like to leave your, a sort of mark on the world. Because I think, as I mentioned earlier, the one thing we're all starting to realize, usually around this age, is that life is not forever. There's no taxes and death are the only things that are guaranteed. So I think now is the perfect time to start thinking about, how do you want to be remembered. And even there's the exercise that some people have done, which is write your own obituary. Write it as it is today, and then write it as it is in the future, and then figure out where those gaps that you actually want to close. So ideally, like, how do you want that obituary to read, and start making and taking action towards that now.
Absolutely.
Susan, I want to dive into one more topic here in the last few minutes that we have, and that's your 60 before 60 project that you've been writing about on your website. Tell us about how your 60 before 60 project came about, and then a little bit, I think you're into like number 45 or something like that.
Something
So
like that.
tell
Yeah,
us
we're getting near the finish line here. I'm getting a bit nervous, but yeah.
tell us
So
about the project, and then maybe some of the things that you've done so far.
sure. So I turned 59 last November. Sorry, yeah, I turned 59 last November. And as I kind of took a step back, it was sort of a milestone kind of moment. And I went, Shoot, like with COVID, I don't know about you guys, but I was pretty much like I spent a lot of time social isolating and all that sort of stuff. And so we were coming out of the pandemic and people were asking me to do things or go places. And I was always coming up with excuses why I didn't want to. Oh, I'll have to get dressed, or by the time I have to get in the car. And I was starting to find that I was getting way more homebody than I ever been before. And so I knew I had to shake things up because it was not a very, I didn't think it was a very healthy attitude to have. I was kind of disconnecting from the world rather than, I needed to reconnect. So this was really my attempt to re-engage with life. Plus, the other thing was I was noticing time was going like way too fast and I couldn't figure out what was going on. And then I did a little bit of research about it. And I don't know if you guys have ever heard of the concept of the holiday paradox. Yes, no, no, yes. Okay. So the holiday paradox, basically, like think about when you're a child, it seems like a summer goes on for years and years and years. And the reason is because your brain is actually having to develop new neuron paths because of the experiences that you're having. But as you get older, if you keep doing the same things over and over and over again, you're not creating new paths, which then actually makes it seems like time's just going by very quickly because you're not having to slow, like your brain is not slowing down to absorb more things. So for instance, when you go on vacation, even though it seems like it goes fast, when you come back and you think about it, typically you go, wow, it seemed like that lasted so long. It's usually because it's filled with new experiences. And so what I wanted to do was really, twofold. One, I wanted to get myself out of my own kind of rut. And two, I wanted to maybe inspire others to start thinking, because I was also hearing from others, they were kind of in the same sort of feeling, like to just get up and push yourself and try and do some new things. So the things that I'm doing, they're not what I would call necessarily bucket list worthy. So some people go, is this your bucket list? I'm like, nah, getting my blood work done is not a bucket list item. But it was something because the pandemic had put off because I didn't want to go to the health, the health centers, that sort of thing. So, I mean, that's an example of one, or even going to the library. When I actually thought about it, I hadn't been to the library in 20 years. I walked into the library as one of my items and my brain was blown away. Like they've completely transformed themselves, at least the one that is around us. They've got foosball tables, they've got green screens, they've got working pods, working rooms. I mean, they've got nightly events. So I'm trying to also bring an element of things for sort of an older audience to think about doing that, are easily accessible, not necessarily like I'm not jumping off, skydiving quite yet anyways. Well, I don't even know. We're not going to do that. I thought about it, toyed with it, but it came off the list. So, but it's sort of everyday things. Yet at the same time, I also went on an Alaskan cruise with my daughter, which was like, to me, that was like bucket list worthy. That was like such an experience. And the fact that I got to spend it with my adult child, just her and I, that was great. So it's a whole bunch of different things. And as you mentioned, Reed, I finished 47. I've got to get to 60 by mid-November. So I'm now just, chomping through a few, got a few to go, but I'm pretty confident I will definitely get to the 60 by that point.
Have you come up with the entire list yourself, Susan, or have you gotten ideas from readers or other colleagues or people friends?
Yes, yes, and yes. So,
Okay.
it's interesting. I've gotten a lot of suggestions. Some of it's I've done with friends because that's what they've suggested. Like I just recently made fresh pasta. A girlfriend had said, "Hey, have you ever made pasta?" And I said, "No." Okay, well then, okay, well, guess what? We're making pasta. So that one was an example. Somebody else had suggested, that I go to this concert or see this. So it's been a combination of that. And then my family, of course, has been very supportive in doing this. And again, God bless my husband, because often he's stuck on camera duty or something, because I'm also trying to document this as I'm going through it. So he
Sure.
just rolls his eyes when I hand him the phone. It's like, oh my God, is this ever going to end? But, hopefully by mid-November, it'll be all over.
I think in one of your articles, Susan, you talk about doing this to push your boundaries. I think learning about yourself is probably mixed in there. And then you talk about things that maybe will change your life. Have you come across or done anything where you've kind of taken a different perspective or a different look at something simply because you've tried it?
Yeah,
and you
absolutely.
got to
Well, I
experience
mean,
it.
the one that was the most emotional experience, which I wasn't expecting, is I went to the Holocaust Museum. I read about
Oh,
it,
yeah,
learned about it in school, but I never actually went to a specific museum, and I found that was quite an emotional experience, and something that I think we really truly do need to keep,
yeah,
in the public eye, to make sure that we never ever ever go back and something like that happen again. So that was
yeah,
definitely an emotional experience. I've also learned there's been a couple of things that I haven't quite honestly enjoyed, which is also part of the exercise. So I always
yep,
wondered about what, will I like this? And then I went and it was like, eh. But and that was part of the experience. And then there's other things I'm definitely going to be going back to. So there's a couple of sports related things that I've done that I'll probably head back and try and do. I'm also discovered I really enjoy spending time in nature, and I've done a lot more activities that have taken me outside, and the restorative properties of nature, I think we completely underestimate, and I think we really do need to go and get some of that green space in on a regular basis, because it can definitely help, you know, give you a different perspective on things.
yeah. That's what I found interesting about your 60 before 60 project is, as we talked about earlier, when we come out of the work world and we have a defined schedule every day, we have structure to our lives, and then all of a sudden we have all this time. That's one thing that people need to do is they need to try different things, experience different things that they've always wanted to try. Again, it doesn't have to be bucket list things. I think just the idea of spending time exploring what interests us can lead us to that idea of what's our next purpose, what's our next passion, how can we create a legacy. All of those things kind of come from that exploration piece
Yeah,
that
I
people
think
go
we all
through.
don't want to live a life of regrets. I mean, I can't remember. I think it was Kathleen. I can't remember. Kathleen Taylor, I think was her name, and she actually did a TED talk specifically on things that people said sort of on their deathbed. And the one thing that was the strongest was that they wish that they had lived a life true to themselves. And so to me, that really resonated. And it's like, I don't want to have lived a life of I coulda, woulda, shoulda. And what I'm noticing going through this exercise is I'm now, when I'm having conversations and when we're talking to people about, what we should do, I'm actually grabbing my phone saying, you know what, let's schedule it now and get it on the
Mhm.
calendar, because otherwise we have the conversation, we walk away, it never happens. And then we get back together again and we can say, oh, we were going to do that. Oh yeah, we really should. And then we walk away.
Right.
It's a cycle. And so now it's like, I mean, that God bless the technology. We've now got a phone, you pull it out, you open up your calendar and say, okay, what day? And we're booking it and we commit to it. And I'm actually doing it, which I think is a major behavior change for me. And it's nothing else that I'm going to take from this besides, learning about definitely some things that I really want to continue with, is that if you want to do something, you have to commit to it and you have to do it. Otherwise, it just becomes something that you always wished you had and never did. And I think that's the biggest shift that I'm discovering in all of this.
Yep. That's a great place to end our conversation today. Is there anything else, Bob or Susan, you'd like to add? I'm going to pull up Susan's contact information while we kind of end the discussion. Anything you guys want to share?
Bob?
No, I think we covered it all. You get your 60 before 60 in there very nicely. If you're only in the mid 40s, you're right. You got about 15 more to go. So
Yeah, I got about 8 weeks, 15 to go. So
right, there you go.
gotta get my running shoes on.
Exactly.
So I wanted
No,
to make sure and whoops, go ahead, Susan.
no, I just wanted to thank you both so much for having me. This has been great, and I really appreciate having the opportunity to share with everybody what's going on in Booming Encore, as well as my life, and hopefully help everybody else also live their own Booming Encore, because that's what I'm trying to do.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Susan. Here's Susan's contact information again. The website is boomingencore.com. You can subscribe to her newsletter from the website. You can also see her 60 before 60 project on the website. Again, the books that Susan was the co-author of and contributing author to are listed there. Her email, if you'd like to reach her directly, is listed there, swilliams@boomingencore.com. And you can find a lot more about Booming Encore on all of these social media sites. So Twitter, LinkedIn, YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Pinterest, and look for the hashtag 60before60. Thanks everybody for joining us on today's episode. We'll see you next time when we continue exploring retirement and longevity beyond the numbers.